let's begin. So, I'm a 2017 Tony Elumelu Fellow. This is a brilliant initiative. I imagine that a lot of you want to apply for TEF this year. Of course, that's why you're watching this. And unlike the previous years, what is different about this year is that there is a cognitive and personality assessment part, which is the part I'm going to be taking. So I'm not going to be talking so much about your business as a where or how to brand your business. I'm going to be talking from the point of a psychologist. Actually, I have a BS in psychology, so you're in safe hands. Before now, there was nothing like a cognitive assessment or personality assessment. There was nothing like that before now. So it's a new introduction. Now the question is, what exactly, before we talk about how to answer the questions, like what is the importance of a personality test? Like what is the significance? Now the thing is, personality tests provide a way to categorize the different characteristics or traits of people. It essentially helps the foundation, that's Tony Elumelu Foundation, understand better the kind of person that you are. That is what a personality test is all about. So the personality testing part is to really understand the kind of person that you are, the kind of traits, and the kind of track that would be better for you, because now there are different tracks for the Tony Elumelu program. So that's like the goal of the personality testing. Now, in terms of the cognitive assessment is really where the work is. It's more about your reasoning. That we're talking about your perception, yes, it's testing your mathematical ability, the ability to use mental processes to solve work-related problems. That's essentially what the cognitive test is looking at. So you would see that some of the questions are mathematical, very technical questions like JAM. So it's testing your ability to solve problems, because the foundation is assuming that you're serious about this, you want to run business, and the thing is, if you're unable to solve these problems, essentially you would struggle in your business, because you would be faced with a lot of mathematical, not necessarily like tough math as it were, but a lot of dicey situations where you have to calculate, and essentially you cannot manage what you cannot measure. So without a sound knowledge of basic maths, it's impossible to run a business. There's no way you can run a business without keeping records, there's no way you can run a proper business, a structured business that way. So that is why the cognitive tests are very important. That's like the role that they play. Now, of course, the part that you've been waiting for, I know you want us to go right into it and talk about the questions. Now, the disclaimer is that I cannot tackle the questions one by one. Of course, that would be Orijo or Expo, the way we say in Nigeria. But what I'm going to do is that I'm going to just pick on some questions, and I'm not even going to tell you the number, right? Because, of course, I'm a fellow, so I don't want the foundation to come after me and say, hey, Benga, you're revealing the secrets, to other fellows. Of course, absolutely, that would not be helping you in any way. So let's talk about some of the questions. Like, I will not mention the number, but I'll just give you an idea, for instance. So section 2 is, of course, this is the personality part, section 2. And one of the questions, for instance, is asking if you can guess what others are thinking, right? Now, the foundation is not trying to find out if you're a mind reader or something like that. The foundation is trying to understand your temperament, right? What kind of person are you, right? Let me give you an idea, for instance. I can see another question is it is okay to relax once in a while. That's another question. The thing is that entrepreneurs are generally restless people, right? But essentially, of course, entrepreneurs also know that it is okay to relax. So for these questions, it's not necessarily yes or no, as it were. It's not as if like there's a right answer. But of course, you must calculate as you're picking options, right? You must think like an entrepreneur. Even if right now, if you work in a business, you have to approach these questions from the mindset of an entrepreneur. Of course, as much as possible, try to be yourself. Try to be yourself. Okay, I see Tohib Yusuf is saying, I can hear very clearly. All right, thank you very much, Tohib. I can see Blessing has joined us. Thank you so much for joining us. Now, I'm going to pick on, just a few questions. Of course, I won't tell you which question I'm picking on, right? I see a question here, for instance, that says, I prefer to maintain formal relationships with people at work, right? Now, just like I'm saying, it doesn't necessarily have to be a yes or a no answer, but you have to think as an entrepreneur, and you as a person, for instance, do you prefer to maintain relationships with people? Do you agree with the statement? And just think like an entrepreneur. Think like an entrepreneur that you are, that you aspire to be, and pick your answers accordingly. Because of course, the challenge here is that if your answers show that you do not necessarily have what it takes to be an entrepreneur, it means that you probably may not be put on the track that you want. So essentially, you have to try to answer to the best of your ability, but also remember that Tony Elumelu Foundation is looking for people that have that entrepreneurial gene in them, you know, that spirit, the can-do spirit of an entrepreneur. I like this particular question. It says, when wronged by others, I tend to forgive easily. That's one of the questions here. And of course, again, think as someone who is trying to start a business or trying to run a business. People are going to offend you all the time. So if you're someone who does not forgive easily, for instance, how exactly do you intend to run a business? So of course, I'm not saying, you know, what you should pick or what you should not pick. I'm simply saying, when you're answering these questions, you have to think like an entrepreneur. Even if right now you've not started that business, even if you've never run a business before, you have to think about that. That's how you answer the question, with the mindset of an entrepreneur. Now, I'm going to skip because there are so many of these questions. And just like I said, try to be honest, but more importantly, think like an entrepreneur. So I want to move to section 3. Section 3 is dicey. You have more of the cognitive assessment here, right? And if you look at one of the questions here talks about shares. Somebody sold the shares for something percent. What is the share gain? Now, if you remember primary school, when we talk about, you know, profit and loss and all the formula, essentially you have to remember the profit percent formula, right? You need to remember that formula. And when you're calculating profit percentage or loss, right, of course you know that it is the final price minus the initial price divided by the final price times 100%. This formula is very important. I know it's primary school, you did it in primary school, you probably forgotten. You have to go back. That formula is very important. There are quite a number of questions that revolve around that formula. Percentage profit, percentage loss. Once again, the formula is final price minus initial price divided by initial price times 100%. If you divide it by the final price, you're going to get a wrong answer. And of course, just like JAM, you will find your answer right there and you think, oh, I've gotten it. So this formula is very, very important. You need to note it down. I want to go back to another question. I'm going to, of course, I'm not definitely going to tell you the answer or anything like that, but I'm going to look at the questions and talk about the formulas that will lead to the answers that you seek. So let me move down a little bit to another question. Okay, there's a question here that does not require a formula, for instance, asking about what is the thing that you need to start a business. Of course, what is the thing that you need to start a business, right? The answer is crystal clear, right? The thing that you need to start a business is that thing in your mind, right, that you want to express. I'm not going to say more than that, right? I'm not going to say more than that. Okay, so what type of economy allows the government to determine what are produced? Okay, how is profit calculated, for instance? How is profit calculated? If you look at the options under this question, how is profit calculated? It essentially gives you an idea, an overview. And just like I said, this is very straightforward. You already know how profit is calculated. This is very straightforward. In fact, you don't need my help here. It's straightforward. Now, there's a question here asking about the greatest reason for becoming an entrepreneur. Now, I know that if you're a Nigerian, for instance, or an African, you might think, oh, my greatest reason, for instance, is I want to be free. In fact, I'm surprised that there's no, I want to blow, you know, as part of the options, right? That should probably be option E or something like I want to blow. However, you need to think deeply about the greatest reason for being an entrepreneur. For you, it might be to be financially free. It might be to make the world a better place. It could be to free your passion. Just pick the option that really relates to you here. There's really no right or wrong answer for this question. Okay, so I see another question asking about percentage profit. Again, I go back to the formula. Okay, before I go on, I can see someone is asking, am I permitted to share this video? Absolutely, yes. Samuel, you can share this video. Tag all your friends, tag everybody, taggable. You can share this video. Yusuf, thank you for joining us. Good evening. So let's move on. I can see another question here about percentage profit. And of course, I've gone over the formula. Don't forget, it's the same primary school math here. The same formula. There are quite a number of questions. So that's how you answer questions on that. Any question asking you about percentage profit, percentage loss is the exact same formula for calculating percentage profit or percentage loss. So there's another question they're asking about what you would do if you get the grant, for instance. Now, of course, I'm not going to tell you the answer, but I can tell you for free that if you pick a crazy option like traveling to America or Europe, for instance, absolutely, you're not going to win the grant. The foundation is looking for people who are ready to start their business or grow their business and actually stay in the country and the continent, not run away, get a visa or something like that. So, I mean, this is a very straightforward question. Then there's another question on whether or not a business must make money in the first year. Now, this question is a tricky question because essentially there's no right or wrong answer. Sometimes businesses don't make money in their first year at all, sometimes, right? However, if you were to ask me personally, like, what do I think? I think it's nice for the business to make profit in the first year, but it's not a must, right? So the answer is right in between what I have just said right now, the right answer. So figure that out. Okay, now I want to move on to section 4 right now, to section 4. Okay, Oluwafemi, thank you for joining us. Thank you so much for joining us. So section 4 right now, section 4 is about business and commercial questions. Now, one of the questions here talks about recruitment, right? It talks about, okay, I can see this. You are the co-founder of company Y. You need to hire an intern, and with some prior work or internship experience, graduated within the last 1 year with a score of at least 75%. The preferred candidate should have good communication skills, but willing to travel, blah, blah, blah. So now you have options like there's Yvonne, who graduated with an overall of 75%. There's Susan, who has good communication skills. There's Dale. Now, this question, of course, is a trick question, very tricky question, right? So how to answer this question is essentially to look at the work experience. Look at what you're looking for. Preferred candidate should have what? Good communication skills. Be willing to travel at short notice. Be open to work different shifts. So out of all these candidates, who meets, these 3 things that you're looking for? Who meets it? This is essentially recruitment 101, because when you're recruiting, you don't want to just, rely on your gut feeling or things like that. You definitely need to have a set of criteria, like specifications. It's just like when you're trying to buy a high-end phone or something like that. You can't just go to the market and say, give me any phone, right? It's the same way when you're recruiting. You can't just go and say, give me any candidate, right? In fact, and we're not talking about things right now. We're talking about people. We're talking about people that have emotions, that have dreams, and all of that. So this is really pretty serious. So that's how you go about it. Look at the 3 candidates and look at the one that meets these 3 criteria the most. The answer is right there. Okay, so let's move on. Now, there's a question here that is talking about pattern or rule of words. I can see water, sky, home, fish. Now, how to answer questions like this? There are some of the questions like this where it asks about which of the following fits the above pattern or rule. Look at water, for instance. You can see that water is fish and crab. What do they have in common? These 2 animals live inside the water. Look at home, for instance. Home, mom and dad. What do mom and dad have in common? Of course, mom and dad, we both know they gave birth to us. They're married, they live in the home, right? So, when you look at sky, for instance, you have eagle. The eagle flies in the sky. So, the answer to this, of course, is what else flies? Very simple. I cannot tell you the answer. Of course, I cannot tell you the answer. But the answer is right there. That's how you answer questions like this that have to do with pattern. You need to ask yourself, like, what do they have in common? Sometimes you need to ask yourself, what do they not have in common? But mostly it's usually about commonality. Essentially, you are trying to identify patterns. There's another question here about a meeting. The CEO is going for a meeting and they're saying which team should go for the meeting. When, as a business person, sometimes you definitely come across this. I know I've come across this where we want to attend a meeting, want to go for a meeting, and I'm thinking, who should attend this meeting? Absolutely the kind of people that should attend meetings like this. You definitely want to have the marketing person involved in that meeting because, of course, the marketing people are always pitching. You want to have the person that will work on that account. The person that will actually work on that account. You want to have that person in that meeting because if you're making empty promises, it is that person that will pinch you in that meeting. And if the client, for instance, is making a unrealistic request, it is that person that will voice out. the marketing person essentially, will most likely close the deal. So the answer to this question is, of course, found in that. You need to look out for the people who, if they don't attend that meeting, something will happen, something bad. Maybe not today, but probably tomorrow. So that's how you answer the question on that about meetings. This is not a recruitment question. It's more of like a pitching question about marketing. How do you win business? Okay. So I see, I'm going to attend to these questions in categories. I see a question here that talks about the cost components of a startup. And it talks about labor, material, social, rent, right? And then it lists that the direct cost of product, something is this, the wholesale price is this, which of the above statements is incorrect. Now, once again, you want to go back to your formulas. What is the formula for direct cost? How do you calculate direct cost, right? How do you calculate the wholesale price? How do you calculate the material cost? That's what you want to do. Now, when you're talking about direct cost, the direct cost of a product is the cost that goes straight into making the product, right? So, for instance, something like machine rent, you're manufacturing, right? Machine rent. The material, more importantly, the material, right? The labor. Social, for instance, is not a direct cost. Holiday is definitely not a direct cost, right? That's direct cost. Now, of course, for some of these terms, you probably just need to Google them to refresh your memory. But essentially, you need to be sure. You need to be sure of the definition of terms. That's how you approach this. Be sure of the definition of terms. So don't just jump at it and say, oh, because essentially anyhow you calculate it, you'll probably find an answer that makes sense on paper. But anytime you're in doubt or you've forgotten, just go to Google, check the definition of terms, then go back to the question to answer it. Okay. There is another question on recruitment here. Another question on recruitment talking about experience, the sector. Okay, let me just read out the question. A committee of 3 members for the education board is to be selected from a pool of 6 prospective candidates, A, B, C, D, E, F. Candidates A, B, and C are male, and the rest are females. At least one of the selected candidates should have a minimum of 10 years cognitive experience in the education sector. The committee should have at least 1 male and at least a female candidate. Each of the committee members should have studied a different course for bachelor's degree. Now, when you look at the options available to you, for instance, you would see clearly that there's a particular option that shows diversity, right? That shows diversity, where you have one person that has a lot of experience, right? In fact, somebody has 15 years experience, for instance. But it doesn't matter. You don't just look at, oh, this person has 15 years experience, so that's the person I'm going to pick. The person must be able to satisfy all the conditions. Now, I've answered a similar question earlier, so that's how you answer, that's how you tackle this. Okay. There is a question on profit again, and don't forget the formula that I gave for profit earlier. Essentially, it's the same thing for all the questions on profit. Once you calculate it, you'll be able to get your answer. Okay, there's a question on sequence of alphabet. Now, for this question, if you look at the first row, let me read out what I'm seeing on my screen. For instance, I'm seeing X, Y, A, B, A, X. Now, if you look at this sequence, for instance, you begin to wonder what do they have in common. But let me tell you this. When you look at X, Y, A, B, and you look at the final column, which is AX, what do they have in common? You see that there's the A from the middle, and then there's the X from the beginning, from the first column, right? You look at the second row, and you see that there's the similarity again. B from the second column, Y from the first column, right? So with these few points of mine, I hope you've been able to figure out what the answer to this question is. It's really very straightforward. Okay. Then there is another question on showing a table, showing products of a startup. And it talks about what would be Peter's MSRP. Now, MSRP simply means manufacturer's suggested retail price. Let me take that again. MSRP means manufacturer's suggested retail price. Now, you need to be able to calculate your markup. Essentially, you need to be able to calculate your markup. And how do you calculate your profit markup? There's a difference between profit margin and profit markup. I want to quickly clarify the difference. To calculate your profit markup, it's profit over cost price times 100. That's the percentage for markup. To calculate your profit margin, of course, that's profit over revenue times 100. So this question is a markup question, right? Is a markup question, because essentially it's asking you that, what would be Peter's suggested retail price? Essentially what it's saying is, what price would Peter sell it? Because obviously Peter cannot sell the product for the same price at which he bought it, right? So I hope that helped. Okay, so I can see another question on profit and loss. Is the same way you calculate it, the same formula. There's another question here on pattern, for instance, on pattern. Now I'm going to take this question on pattern, so you can understand better. I can see a set of numbers in front of me. I see there are 3 rows, 3 columns. I see 3, 6, 2. I see 5, I see 20, I see 4. So what do they have in common, for instance? You need to look at the numbers, right? Look at the one in the middle, there's 6. Right? When you multiply 3 by 2, you get 6. When you multiply 5 by 4, you get 20. So obviously you know that the relationship between the first column and the last column is a multiplication relationship. So with that, of course, you can crush this question. This is perhaps the simplest question. In fact, the pattern questions are like the simplest questions, because once you pay attention, you would find the commonality and then you crush the question. Okay. So I can see another question on markup. I already answered that. If you forget, go to Google, get the formula for markup so that you know how to answer this. So I'm not going to spend too much time on this. So there are a lot of questions on profit, loss, markup. Very important. 3 key things you should know. Profit, loss, markup. Those formulas, get them down and get your biro, and your calculator. Essentially with these formulas, you can get it wrong.